He who conceals his sin does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them will find mercy. Proverbs 28:13. It is impossible to actually say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. There was no real passion or object. In fact, I loved the old man, for he had never wronged me. But I think it was his eye. Yes, he had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. And whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and thus I resolved to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. How then am I mad, as some say? Listen and observe how calmly I can tell you the whole story of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allen Poe. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad, but madmen know nothing. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight. In fact, I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every midnight, just at midnight, I would turn the latch of his door and open it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all close, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. An hour! Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, that just so much as a single thin ray fell upon his vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. But every night, the eye was always closed, so it was impossible for me to do the work. For it was not the old man himself who vexed me so, but his evil eye. Now then, upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. I had my head in and was about to carefully open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was sitting upon the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night after night. Presently, I heard a groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief, oh no. It was the low sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me so. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt. I pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears were a cyst growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's only the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse just crossing the floor. Nothing more, nothing more." Yes, He had been trying to comfort himself with these stupid suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death in approaching him had stalked him with its black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel the presence of my head within the room. Anyway, after I had waited a long time, and without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open yet another crack in the lantern, until at length, once again, a single thin ray shot out from the crevice and fell upon his vulture eye. It was open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it, all a dull blue. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But I refrained and kept still. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye, but meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew quicker and quicker and louder and louder. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud shout, I threw the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. At last, it ceased. The old man was dead, and his eye would trouble me no more. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. I then picked up a crowbar from the doorway of the chamber and removed 1, 2, 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber. I then kicked the planks aside and deposited his body all between the scantlings. I then kicked each board into place so cleverly that no pathetic human eye could have detected anything wrong. There had been no blood spot or whatever. I had been too early for that. Presently, I heard a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, but what had I now to fear? I opened it and there stood 2 police officers. A neighbor had heard a shriek during the night, and we had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for again, what had I to fear? I bade the gentlemen welcome. I brought 2 chairs into the room and desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But I felt myself getting pale, and I wished it gone. I fancied a ringing in my ears, but as the ringing became more distinct, I found that the noise was not within my ears. I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? I gasped for breath, and the officers heard it not. Oh, what could I do? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides and excited to fury by the observations of the men. But they still sat there. They sat there while I was in this pain, this agony, and the noise grew louder and louder every instant. I foamed and I raved. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder and louder. And again those men still sat there and chatted pleasantly. Was it possible they heard not? No, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer, and the volume was louder. Anything was more tolerable than this agony. Anything more tolerable than this derision. And it grew louder, louder, louder! Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more, I admit the deed. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart.